Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are finally going to be working on our fox spirits, or at least the first one. I still need to work on the other two. If you've been following my vlogs, you've probably seen me work on them here and there or mentioned the design of them, so I've been kind of on and off working on these for a few months now. Basically, they're designed off of the theme of hear no evil, speak no evil, and see no evil, except it's reversed to where it's I speak all evil, I hear all evil, I see all evil kind of thing. So the listener is the one that we're going to be working on today, and then eventually, once I actually finish the other two, we'll start on the watcher and the screamer. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to work on for our listener is going to be the clay pieces. So I need to make the head and then all four of the feet. Now the face was actually quite easy for this piece, and the main reason for it is because I decided that I wanted to cover up the eyes. So since we're going to cover them up anyways, I didn't even bother sculpting them. So it looks a little weird. I just don't add eyes at all. Now to make up for this, I did focus on the shape of the face a lot more than normal because we're not having a ton of details to focus on. The shape is very important. So after getting everything completely covered in clay and blended together, I focused on the cheekbones and the brow bone, and I really made sure that I liked how that looked before moving on to the details that will be showing. The main details that we are going to have showing on the face are going to be the mouth and the nose. So once I get the basic shape laid out, I'm going to start focusing mainly on that. So you'll see me constantly kind of adding clay here and there, adjusting the basic shape around the muzzle, and then once I like how that looks, I'm going to move on to kind of breaking up where the lips are going to be. So I'm just going to kind of roughly sketch out on both sides of the face where the mouth is. Once I know that I like that shape, I'll really dig in with my tools and define that shape. So when you're first just trying to figure out where you want everything, you don't have to push very hard, just kind of lightly scratch the surface. After that, I added a little bit more clay to the end of the snout where the nose is going to be, just to make it stick out a tiny bit more, and then I started using my tools to sculpt the shape of the nostrils. After I got the shape of the nostrils laid out and I really liked how the nose was looking, I added a little bit of a texture with a dotting tool, and then I just kind of roughed up the surface of the rest of the face. That way, when we glue fur to it, it'll have more to grip onto. And then once I'm happy with the entirety of the face, I'm going to put this in the oven for probably about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. While that's baking, I'm going to start on the clay feet now. So the feet for our fox spirit, I'm going to make them a little bit more delicate. I tend to make very large feet, but with this I want them to be kind of dainty. So I'm not going to use a ton of clay for this. And because the feet are going to be kind of small and hard to handle, I am going to add a wire to them. That way I have something to hold onto and I won't have to worry about bumping the clay. Now for sculpting the feet, I started out with even amounts of clay for each foot, and then I just kind of rolled it out into a cone and pressed it on the surface that I'm working on. Then I took my bent piece of wire that I'm going to use to hold onto the clay foot, and I'm just going to stick it right into the top. You might have to adjust the clay a little bit so it grabs onto the wire. After that, we're going to start sculpting the front of the foot, and we're going to break this up into individual toes. So I'm just going to use my tools and just kind of create some indents and just break up the front of the foot until we have our 4 toes. One thing that helps to make a foot look a little bit more realistic is to make the 2 middle toes just slightly larger than the 2 outer toes. And then these are going to have claws, but I don't want to make them out of clay because I don't want them to be fragile. So for now, we're just going to be pushing in some holes at the tip of each toe. That way we can glue in our claws later. And then once we're done with all 4 of the feet, we're going to put these in the oven at 275 as well for about probably 35-45 minutes. And then once all of our clay pieces are out of the oven, they've cooled to touch so we can handle them, we're going to start painting them. So I'm going to start with the face first, and I'm going to start primering the basic colors that we're going to use for our fox. Now even though the clay is kind of white, it's not as white as the fabric that I'm going to use, so I'm going to add white paint to the bottom of the head. So I'm just going to primer the bottom of the head white, and then I'm going to move on to the top of the head and start adding orange. As I get my orange closer to the edge where the white is, I'm going to try and blend the 2 colors together. I'll have to let that dry a little bit and then I can start adjusting the tints, kind of darkening or brightening different areas until I like it. After that, I let it dry for a little bit and then I moved on to painting the nose. For the nose, we're just going to paint the entire thing black. You'll want to let that dry and then you can start adding gray details around the snout. So kind of framing the nose, we can add a bit more grayness to it, and then we can also kind of brush over the nose itself to add highlights. Another thing that I also ended up doing was I added a little bit of black to the crease of the lips, that way there was a bit of a shadow. Moving on to the feet, these are really easy to paint. We're just going to paint them solid black, let that dry a little bit, and if you want to add a little bit of a highlight, you can take some gray and dust over the toes to make them stand out just a tiny bit. And then once I was done painting the feet, I moved on to making the claws. So the claws are made out of Instamorph. Instamorph is just a moldable plastic that kind of melts when you get it a little bit hot, and you can sculpt it and it re-hardens into different shapes. So I ended up mixing a little bit of black into my Instamorph, and then I just made a bunch of little claws, and I'm going to be gluing these into the little bumps that we have on each toe. So I'm going to glue all my claws into place, I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to resin all of our clay pieces to protect them. For the face, we're only going to be resining the nose, the rest of the face is going to get furred, so we don't need to add resin to it. Okay, so now that we have our clay pieces all finished, we're going to move on to the sewing. So for the sewing, I have a pretty basic pattern that has a body, some legs, and a tail. And we're going to use this to cut out our fabric and then sew everything together. So the sides of the body consist of the neck and the main body, and then I broke each of those up into different colors because I want the belly to be a little bit paler. So I used a khaki, and we're going to sew it to kind of an orange color. Once we have those put together, we're going to take a strip of white fabric, and this is going to go down the belly. So we're going to sew our two body sides to this strip of white fabric. After those are sewn into place, you'll have something like this. And then for the legs, these consist of the upper portion, which is orange, and the lower portion of the leg, which is black. So we're going to sew our black pieces to our orange pieces, and then once those are put together, we can take an inside portion of a leg and an outside portion. We're going to sandwich these together and sew down just the fronts. We're going to do this to both the front legs and both of the back legs. And then the tail consists of 3 colors. The main body of the tail is going to be the orange, and then we're going to fade it to a white. So I have a little bit of khaki in between the orange and the white. So we're just going to sew these pieces together. Now we're not going to close the tail up just yet because I want to actually add some ears to the end of it as well. The listener just is going to have ears everywhere, mainly on the head, but I thought it'd be kind of cool to add a few on the tail. So for making the ears, the inside of all of the ears is a gray felt, and then the outside is a bit of our fur fabric, but it's trimmed down. So I have these 2 layers just glued together, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of a white tuft in the inside of each ear. So I cut out a bunch of little pieces of fur, and we're going to be gluing them to all of the ears, which there is a lot of them. Once I have all the white tufts of fur inside of our ears, I'm then going to kind of trim it up a little bit and then kind of add a little bit more color to it because I don't want it just straight white. I want it to blend a little bit into the gray inside of the ear. Now this is the part that was extremely complicated, is how to lay out the ears on the top of the head and on the end of the tail. So this pattern piece is a little bit intimidating, but basically where I have it drawn with a highlighter, those are where we're going to sew in ears. So this is one solid piece of fabric, and we're going to cut it up and sew the ears in these places. Now if you don't want to follow this, if this looks a little bit too complicated with making something with so many ears, you could do it a different way that would be a little bit more easy. But I was being extremely picky with how I wanted my ears to lay out. So after a lot of sewing, I ended up having all the ears put into place, and now we can use these pieces of fabric as well. So I've got the part that's going to go on the top of the head and the part that's going to add to the end of the tail. So I'm going to start with the tail. I'm going to sew the ear piece in place at the end, and then I'm going to sew up the rest of the tail while stuffing it. And then for the head, we're going to add these as we put the body together. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a wire frame. I made a very simple one. We're going to start by adding the body fabric to the wire frame. So I cut some holes for all the little wire legs to go into, and then we're going to glue the clay head to the end of the wire for the neck. And then once the head is in place, we're going to take the fabric for the body and we're going to glue it around the bottom portion of the head. Normally when I do this, we kind of start from the top and work our way down, but it just worked better to do it this way. And then we're going to take that piece of fabric that has all the ears for the top of the head and we're going to glue it to the very base of the head on the top. You want to let everything dry a little bit and then we can start stuffing and closing up the body. So we're just going to sew along both sides of the fabric with the ears and then we're going to continue going down the body, closing it up. Once you get to the end, we can then add the tail to the wire frame. So we're just going to slide it over the wire for the tail and sew it into place at the end of the body. Once I got the body and tail put together, before we add the legs, I'm going to start trimming the fur. It's just going to be a lot easier if we kind of trim down the fur before we start sewing the legs into place. So I'm just going to take my hair trimmer and I'm going to start kind of shortening the sides of our fox. Once all that excess fur is out of the way, we can start sewing the fabric for the legs. So I'm going to start with the front legs first. So I'm going to take the fabric for the leg and I'm going to take the inside portion of the leg and this is going to be sewn under the wire. So I'm going to place that and then I'm going to take the outer portion of the leg, the more like shoulder blade area, and we're going to sew that over the wire, kind of enclosing the wire into the fabric leg. I'm going to do that to both of the front legs and then we're going to take our clay feet and we're going to add these to the wire frame. So I'm just going to bend and adjust the wire frame to make sure it's the correct length. We're going to wrap our wires that are sticking out of our clay feet to the wire frame, make sure they're nice and secure, and then we're going to take the fabric for the legs and start gluing them around the bases of the feet. And then after that we're going to stuff and close up the back of the front legs and then we can shave them down. For the back legs, these are going to be done pretty much the same way, they're just slightly different in shape. So we're going to sew our fabric into place, add our feet to the wire frame, glue the fabric around the base of them, let it dry, stuff and close those up as well. And then a final shave. When I do this shave, I also went over the rest of the body to make sure the fur kind of blended together a little bit more. Okay, so now that the body is all put together, we're going to add our final details and finish everything up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fur the feet and the face. So I'm going to take my fabric glue, I'm going to kind of brush it over the tops of the toes, and then I'm going to add fur trimmings to it. So I'm going to do this to all 4 of the feet, and then I'm going to move on to the face. Now for the face, because the face is a lot larger than the feet, you can also cut different pieces of fur fabric to fit those areas instead of doing just fur trimmings. So I started with kind of more around the cheeks and under the jaw, and then I moved on to adding fur trimmings to the rest of it. After that, we're going to let all of our fur trimmings completely dry, and then I'm going to start working on the covering of our eyes. So for the covering, I'm going to have a ribbon kind of wrapped around the face to cover where the eyes would have been. And you would think it would make more sense to kind of just wrap the ribbon and tie it and be done, of course gluing it, but it's a lot easier if you cut different pieces of the ribbon and glue them separately and give it the illusion that it's wrapped around because you have a little bit more control on how it lays this way. So I started by gluing my ribbon to the under portion, just cutting a few pieces to cover that up, and then the top portion of the head is going to be one large ribbon that drapes over it. Once I had the ribbon all put in place, I did go over this again with my glue to kind of harden it just a little bit more so I made sure that it was nice and secure. Okay, so the last bit of detail that we're going to do is we're going to just kind of touch up the fur of the body. So I'm going to take my fabric markers and I'm going to just kind of add color here and there. A good example of this is trying to blend the black portion of the leg into the orange of the leg. That way it just doesn't stop and switch colors, it kind of fades. And then I want to add a little bit more color to the orange of the body, so I'm going to add some reds here and there and maybe some brighter oranges. Okay guys, and this is our listener spirit. I'm so happy with how this one came out and I can't wait to start on the other ones. What was really nice about this one is I kind of worked a lot slower and that kind of helped me design it a little bit more because the design for this changed multiple times, and I'm really happy with the final result. So I'm going to have the listener up for sale in my Etsy shop, so if anyone wants to buy him, check the links down below. I also have affiliated links down there for all the art supplies that I tend to like to use to make my art dolls, so buying anything through these links does help support the channel. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!